sorry, did you say 10C?
10D. Yeah. And 9C.
With Commissioner Prichett's
With
permission.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any objections to that or any more changes to the agenda?
Mr. Chanin?
Oh, yes. I would also like to propose that Mr. Chanin, to speak on item 9A be set for 8 o'clock p.m. Is that time certain?
He's been agendized as 10C, but
Oh,
it is
okay.
related. Actually, you should do two things. One is combine 9A and 10C, and then ask if he may present at a time certain.
Okay. So combine those two items and then have him present at 8 p.m. That's all right.
That'd be great.
Are there any more changes to the agenda? All right, if not, we can approve that by general consent. We will now move on to public comment. As a reminder, each person has 3 minutes. Is there any public comment this time?
There is.
Yes.
In light of the last change of the agenda, this might be a little out of order, but my name is Charles Clark. I'm a resident in District 1, and I'd like to address a few topics that are on your agenda, starting with 10D, which has now been taken off, 9C, which has also been taken off, 9E, the audio recording rules applying to BPD, and it might finish up with a little discussion of 9A, body-worn cameras. So the reality is that on August 5th, there was a meeting of people, many people, 500 or so I would estimate, here at the intersection of MLK and First Avenue. And you'll notice, if you look very closely, not too many of them are wearing masks or carrying weapons. Now, as the parade of people came along, the group calling itself Smash Fascism paraded through the streets, and a few of them are actually wearing black hoodies and masks, but mostly the crowd behind them, the ones far in the background down First Avenue, are unmasked and are simply proclaiming their, let's just say it this way, based on the Resist Pence Trump signs that were through there, I would say they're against the current presidential administration. It wasn't until they got to Shattuck Avenue, right before Addison, where they coalesced into a group, okay? They coagulated, if you will, into a group of people who clearly had some ideas about what to do once they got to Civic Center Park. I take this photograph as partial evidence, not dispositive of course, that Black Bloc is still involved with the free speech events that occur in this city.
1 minute.
Now, the free speech that actually did happen here in Civic Center Park, and really, even if you can't see what's going on here, the thing to focus on is just the red hats, which say "Make America Great." Okay, we know what that means. This speech happened. I take it, wasn't listening in, but I take it the gentleman in the blue shirt here, who is directly addressing these guys, is not agreeing with them. And so this is the sort of robust free speech that Berkeley ought to commit itself to. Now, I guess that's just to say, when you're thinking about this item 10D in the fullness of time, do think that the Black Bloc does show up. Now, moving on to the events of August 5th that happened outside Black Bloc, there was confiscation of a so-called sound truck. I was told about this by an officer of the Alameda County Sheriff's Office. About 20 minutes after it happened, I arrived a little late at Ohlone Park. Was that 3 minutes?
Yes.
Okay, well, I guess I'm going to stop speaking then.
Thank you. Is there any more public comment at this time? All right, seeing as there's no public comment, we will move on to approval of the minutes from last meeting. Are there any changes to the minutes as, I think this is the minutes right here.
Oh, they were passed out.
Yeah, they were.
Yes.
If no changes, we can approve the minutes by general consent. All right, so moved. We will now move on to my report. I don't really have a report for today, just want to say that I hope everyone's having a great day, and I have a feeling this is going to be a very productive meeting. So excited for that. Now for the POC officer's report.
Okay, thank you, Chair. As far as complaint status, there have been no new complaints filed still, since I think it's been like June. I want to remind commissioners about the October 17th special meeting where Sergeant Fomby will be doing a presentation on the Berkeley Police Department's de-escalation training that they received. And I want to give a report on the NACOLE conference. I've actually asked, I'll give a little report, and then I've asked Commissioner Allaby to give a report, and I was hoping Commissioner Perez-Velez would be here in time so he could give a short report as well. Pardon me?
Go ahead.
Okay, if you wanna go first. Okay.
Mine is
Since
short
I'm-
because I wasn't able to put all in that I wanted to because of the short notice you gave me.
Oh, I know, I did give you short
Yeah,
notice.
so anyway, we'll just run through this. The conference, was held from September 29th to October 4th in St. Petersburg, Florida. The purpose of this conference was to provide a wide range of topics geared towards giving those who work in and around oversight the tools they need to do the work and to make a difference. There were numerous tracks that were available to choose from, which included training for oversight, building public trust, correctional oversight, and sustainable reform efforts. I attended 90% of it, and I'll just talk about maybe 2 or 3 since time is not permitted. I attended a track on youth and law enforcement, and the benefit from this session was how many agencies are now addressing youth needs and setting up outreach programs that are fostering trust between youth and law enforcement. The youth in St. Petersburg discussed their feelings and interactions with the police since participating in these programs, and it has been a positive experience for them. I attended a track on building public trust and less lethal policies and tactics. The officer who discussed the tactics and building the trust was from the Denver Police Department. And what he does is he does the training he emphasizes training towards more de-escalation. And he discussed how the culture of an agency can impact policy. And this, in my opinion, brought up food for thought. How officers are in certain situations have to consider the legality of what they're doing. Is this necessary? Is it reasonable? Is it appropriate? And they involve their community in their discussions around this effort. I also attended a track on growing crisis, what's happening in our jails and why we all need to talk about correctional oversight. The panel discussion revolved around how there is an accountability in the prison industry and prisoners have no recourse for reporting abuse at the hands of others, whether it's the correctional officers or whether it's another inmate, and there's no transparency. And so one of the things that they were emphasizing is that the community should get involved in trying to establish an oversight of the prison industries, because this is one area that no one seems to care about. And I thought that was really interesting because I wasn't aware that there was no oversight. And then we talked about police unions and the work of civilian oversight. And this track, I gained a better understanding of why oversight and unions sometimes clash. And what I gained from it was we must at all times have a dialogue and open line of communication with the police department and not let them feel that it's us against them, because that's not what it is. We're all working towards the same goal. So there was more that I wanted to say, but this is about it.
Do you wanna say more?
No,
I
you can go ahead.
I told you 2 minutes because
You
I
told
know I
me
did
2
it
minutes.
last
That's
minute.
okay,
So-
it was last minute, okay.
So I thought,
Yeah.
I
No,
thought
you
you
can
might
go
not
ahead.
have time. Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
okay, so, St. Petersburg is the Sunshine City, which, is, I think, feeling probably some of the remnants of Hurricane Michael right now. The schedule, I did put the schedule of sessions in your packet so you can get an idea, and Commissioner Allaby's already given you an idea of the kinds of topics that were discussed at the conference. I find it, really, this is my 5th conference, so I've gone every year since I've become a PRC officer, and I by now I have, met friends and colleagues from all over the country, and I get to reconnect with them at this conference. It's always a great time to compare notes, what's going on in your jurisdiction. You learn about, everything, everyone from the largest jurisdiction, New York, with, over 30,000 sworn officers and more people in their oversight office than, we have sworn officers, down to smaller, us being one of the smallest oversight staffs. And it's always especially good to reconnect with our local people here from the oversight agencies of Oakland, San Francisco, Bart, Sonoma County, and Richmond. And I did meet a couple of the commissioners from the newly formed Oakland, I think it's CPRA, I can't remember. Every agency has their own, alphabet of whatever they are, and I tend to lose track of them. There are also attendees from around the world, including Jamaica, Japan, Mexico, and Canada. At one dinner, I sat next to a gentleman from Barcelona who does oversight for that entire region. And I don't remember exactly how we got on these subjects, but I remember explaining to him what donuts were in terms of the car maneuvers, and the idea of celebrating Indigenous Peoples' Day instead of Columbus Day. So it's always nice to have that, a contact with somebody not from the United States and introducing them to some of our concepts. It's a tradition I've noticed for the chief of police from the host city to address the NACOLE conference, and this year was no exception. Chief Anthony Holloway told the audience that when he arrived in St. Petersburg 4 years ago, he did not, where there was already an established oversight board, he was not really interested in having civilians tell him how to do his job, which is, a common perception among officers. But now he's sold on the idea of civilian oversight. I agree with Commissioner Allaby that there was this focus, expanded focus on what they called the correctional track, and a track being sort of a series of workshops or sessions on the same topic. And to me, it was also eye-opening to really hear about the number of people that are incarcerated in our country, in our jails and prisons, and to come to understand that there's like a drop in a bucket of oversight in those facilities, and how the environment in prisons, as Commissioner Allaby mentioned, is us versus them, but it's so toxic that it changes even the correctional officers, and not in a good way. So if there's anybody here who feels they need a new mission in life, may I suggest getting into jail and prison oversight. There were, many different topics and concepts discussed, including fair and impartial policing and procedural justice. And it's heartening to know that these might be new concepts in other jurisdictions, but our department is very familiar with them. And another idea, the thought that was mentioned was that due to the many different models of oversight that are out there, I mean, people talk about the three main models about investigative and auditor and review and monitoring. Somebody said there probably isn't one best practice, but maybe best fit would be a better way to think about what's the most desirable structure to have in your particular community. I would say outreach to the community, getting other people to, in your city or jurisdiction, to know about the oversight agency's existence, let alone their role, is a big issue for many of the agencies. And one of the highlights was Judge Thelton Henderson, who's a retired district court judge here, talking at the awards banquet by Skype about his role in overseeing the monitoring of the Oakland Police Department, and what a long haul that was, and a little discouraging at times, because he talked about how the monitors would come back and they'd have to, order continue monitoring, and the progress reports were not good enough for him to end the oversight of the OPD. So.
And it continues to this day.
Yeah, and it's still going on.
When did he retire?
You retired
Pretty
last
recently.
year.
Yeah.
Yeah, very recently. But I'm sure I don't know, but there must be somebody else who's taken it.
Judge Arick.
Yeah. You said who?
Judge Arick.
Just, okay, thank you.
Why was the chief sold on oversight?
I knew you were gonna ask me that,
And
because I was
what
writing
kind of
this.
oversight did he have?
I think,
I mean, there are different kinds of oversight.
right, there are. There is a civilian commission in St. Pete. Does anybody else remember who was there? I believe that he saw the value of the community knowing that there was an outside agency, and that sort of building up trust in the department. And the department, if it would either do the right thing, or if it weren't, that there was a method by which those issues could be addressed. So, Commissioner Perez-Velez has walked in the room.
I'll jump into that.
At exactly the right time. It's your turn.
So I'll jump into that, because the chief of police in Petersburg is a much different police department, and they have full access to any and all records of police officers.
Well, they do.
Because there's more opening. So one of the interesting questions is, every time in a panel he was asked, if somebody asked for the information on a police officer involved in on a shooting or anything else, what kind of information was released? And the chief said all. Right? He doesn't hold back from releasing any kind of information. But as it relates to the chief was part of 3 different groups that were having conversations about police oversight. And what I got from a lot of the members from NACOLE was that he was very active in the conversations and very much engaging. And for the record, he did an amazingly great job on one of the last panels at the end, talking about the law on homelessness and what it is that the police is seeing in terms of how the police, the ever-changing dynamic of the existence of homelessness in cities, and how to address them from an empathic, human way, while not going against the law. And by the law, I mean the expectations of people camping in different places, and how that is, violation of municipal codes. But he did very well.
You're talking about our chief now?
Our chief, yeah,
Yes.
our chief.
Okay, I missed the transition from the St. Pete
The
chief
conversations with
to our
people
chief.
from NACOLE, he participated in 3 different conversation forums himself, that he felt he needed to listen to people And when you're involved in NACOLE and there's police officers and agencies and oversight, it's a really good immersion of what people thought process is behind it. And it is surprising at times that it is not all negative. It is all about, it's accountability, it's accessibility, it's transparency. There are some different difficult aspects. We know that in Louisiana there is quite a negative dynamic in terms of the court system and the police department and the oversight board. We know that NAPA and Sonoma here is having a lot of difficult problems with the sheriff's department as it relates to the reports that accentuates and puts forward the missteps that police departments are doing in terms of arrests and uses of force. So I mean, but the dynamic for the chief, if I just may finish, was really good. Now the good thing, Ms. Lee, is that the hurricane came in this week, so not that made everybody be safe, but the hurricane waited a week or 2 weeks until we left. But it was a great thing to see. It's very collegiate. Some panels are more engaging than others. Some are just getting the weeds about reporting and data analysis. So if you're not into it, you're like, oh my God. But I have to say that the panel that I was in, I'm going to toot my horn here, because he had Professor Marks from, who's somebody who's taught all 3,000 police officers in the LA Police Department about bias policing. He was a speaker as well. It was very, very engaging and very, very much on point. So I just sent an email to Alexa and Mark Smith, congratulating him for having such a great panel, which was so active. In which a sergeant who used to be a use of force trainer was talking about how he believes in police oversight, how police oversight can be a tool for change and police not only accountability but for growth. But I'll leave it at that. So, all in all, a great experience.
Is that it for your report?
Yes, that's the end of my report.
Sorry,
Mr.
Alan.
Chairman.
Sorry.
Okay, moving on to the Chief of Police's report.
Sorry, I'm sorry, did you want me to give a brief overview?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, I forgot. Commissioner Ramsey came back from
I'll make it
IACP.
quick. I went to a conference also, the convention for the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which was held in Orlando between October 5th and yesterday, October 9th, so I got back last night. I did not realize it going there, but it is the largest conference of police command in the world. So 17,000 people there. So it was very involved. It was 4 days of lots of different panels that you could choose from and speakers. It really was sort of a smorgasbord. You could pick specific topics that you found to be interesting or important. There was some networking and socializing going on as well. There was also a huge exhibition hall for vendors trying to sell all kinds of equipment to police officers, anything from boots to helicopters. So, I went to a few panels. I'd be happy to talk to you about some about it afterwards if anybody wants to talk to in more detail. But there were some ones that were interesting and specific to some of the stuff that we're doing. Human trafficking was interesting, and so the dangers of that activity, but also the emphasis that really I think a lot of offices thought should be put on it. In police departments, often people see it's just seen as part of prostitution. They don't worry about it so much, and there's not that sort of emphasis. But they talked about some interesting programs that they had going on in Florida, not only with respect to human trafficking on sex workers' side, but also for laborers. So that was interesting. And I will say, Berkeley's had its own human trafficking issues with both sex and labor in the not too distant past. I also went to a panel on de-escalation, what some of the legal standards were, also use of force policies, and also body-worn cameras. There was some interesting material from both the chief of police from Durham as well as in North Carolina, and a pretty robust discussion about the different types of policies that are in place, particularly regarding viewing of cameras. I know just been one, or viewing of footage by supervisors, by questioners, by the actual officers. So that was interesting. I gotta say there was not a consistent method that was used in that. And then one of the most interesting ones in specific to us, which was First Amendment or issues surrounding policing large events, specifically ensuring protection of First Amendment rights in protests that involve extremist groups. So obviously that was pretty relevant to Berkeley. It was moderated by the Anti-Defamation League, an individual from the Anti-Defamation League, so that was interesting. And then they had chiefs of police from Richmond, Virginia, Knoxville, Tennessee, a deputy chief from Washington, D.C., and actually the UC Berkeley chief of police. And there were lots of people in the audience too from different areas, including a bunch of folks from Berkeley. We're talking about the issues that people face in that. Joint command issues, and that seemed to be the most important thing, is to be able to coordinate from various police agencies and having them all in one. But also it was interesting to hear all the police officers talk about the importance of working with both the Anti-Defamation League and the ACLU up front to try to gather information about groups that are protesting, groups who are counter-protesters, and also to give some insight from what can legally be done by police officers so they don't overstep the bounds. All those agencies seem to have good working relationships with the ADL and the ACLU, which maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but maybe I was surprised how actively they seem to be reaching out. Police departments were reaching out to those groups to try to get them involved. I talked earlier to one commissioner, Terry, but about some of the issues that they said were consistent in terms of being able to control the situation, to make sure there wasn't violence, essentially separation of groups, protesters and counter-protesters. There did seem to be this consistent theme about prohibited items. How people went about that was very different. People from other areas were very interested in what Berkeley had done in terms of this 24-hour-a-day notice. So Berkeley seemed to be leading the pack or clearing a path in that area that other people were interested in. But other places were very interested in calming the laws that were currently on the books that would prohibit people from bringing certain things. So, for example, they were very across the board, people were very concerned about masks. But there was also discussion in Charlottesville. It turned out that there had been a law in Virginia that had prevented people from walking around with open torches that had not been applied. That people maybe if that had been applied earlier, would have had some effect on some of the early investigations there. But anyway, happy to talk about that later if anyone wants to. There was also a large town hall meeting, interesting discussion about the release of information and videos and how that's done. There's a lot of discussion from the LAPD, where essentially when they release body-worn camera information, anybody can look on the website too. They do it with a narrative. It's almost like, I found it to be somewhat disturbing, but they essentially sort of tell a story and will show a clip of video and then sort of discuss it. Now, they said they were putting it in context, so there's issues about that. So that was interesting. They also said that the state law in California was changing. It's going to require sort of the raw video be posted, and then so now they may do sort of an introductory video, but they'll still have the raw footage rather than sort of clips interspersed in with the discussions by the command officer. There were lots of speakers there. There were some very high-powered speakers. General McChrystal, who was the JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command General in Afghanistan, he's the highest Special Forces General in the armed forces. He spoke. He's now retired. The current FBI Director Ray also spoke. The governor of the state spoke, and also the president of the United States came. So President Trump spoke.
How was that?
I have to admit, I didn't want to hear President Trump, so I didn't go to his talk. But you can watch it on YouTube. It's there. And then there was a large exhibition, like I said, about various items that went around with the chief and some of the commanders who were there, and looked at some of the items that they were looking at. they weren't looking at helicopters, I can promise you, although there were a couple right there on the floor, that they were looking at some speaker systems called LRAD and some software for internal affairs, IA Pro. That's smart work.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Did you see, Brian Core was at this convention as well.
Oh,
So did you see any oversight aspect or anyone, did you see here from anyone from oversight?
So, you know, there was one panel, the very first panel, and I missed it, it was, the sort of the first panel of the conference, and it was coming the night before, it was a little late going, so I did not hear the panel on police oversight.
Yeah, because Brian, essentially, Brian responded to me saying that he was at this
The
conference.
very first morning,
okay.
right off the bat.
Brian
before I
Core's,
got it.
Yeah.
sorry, Brian Core's
For the
the executive, not executive,
President.
president of the board of NACOLE.
Yeah, so they gave a presentation. on
There
the
were
first-
there was at least one or two other people I know who were going from, making that trip from
Mhm.
St. Petersburg, NACOLE, there was a day in between, and then to Orlando, including Chief Greenwood. So, and I'll ask him to give a little spiel when he's here.
And I know the chief did not go to that either, because we were texting about it.
It was in
Yeah.
Louisiana, it was in Louisiana, it was in New Orleans.
No, but that was, like I said, right off the bat, that was the first morning, Saturday morning, it was literally the first thing. Unfortunately, before I got settled in and even knew about it, it was already done, so, and then the chief had texted me, and it was too late.
If I can add just one more thing, it's, the end result of this is also that both Ms. Lee and I will be, both, certified as, oversight practitioners as of this last,
I have to read one more thing.
okay, I have 6 hours left and I did 23 hours, so we'll be both, qualified practitioners.
So what NACOLE has established is something called CPO, Certified Practitioner of Oversight. So that means you have to attend a certain number of workshops, or they have they have trainings, regional trainings as well. So you have to accumulate a certain number of hours in 3 or 4 different areas, and then a couple of
tracks.
Right, and then there's a reading list, and you have to read 2 or 3 things. So both Commissioner Perez-Velez and I are just about, I think he's done, and I'm just about.
Not until I get the paper and not done. But I know that we're both finished. I mean, I wanted, if I can add something quickly, because SB 1421 passed, it was signed by the governor, and I worked with Nancy Skinner. I mean, I'll keep this board appraised, because the board at BART is going to do a training on the implications and impact of the passage of this law by legal, both at the state and at BART. When that happens, then I'll tell the members here who want to attend that specific BART board meeting, because it will be a center on training for the commissioners on SB 1421, which should prove, because it's one of the attorneys from state of California who's coming to do. So I'll keep everybody abreast if they want to go to that meeting and know, and maybe we can bring that here as well somehow, or at least have city attorney talk to us about how they see that law affecting us. That's it. Sorry.
Were there any last comments or questions? All right, thank you everyone for sharing, that was very insightful. Now for the chief's report.
I did not have as interesting a week as everybody else.
Let's do the did.
Yeah. Just a couple of things. Everyone here should be happy to know we are going to start training body worn cameras October 22nd, the week of October 22nd. So we should be up and running. Yeah, the week of, yeah. So there's scheduled trainings throughout the department to get the cameras up and running. So.
How's it going?
Well, we've had a couple of folks have been doing kind of a trial run. So they're working through a couple of software glitches, I think, with our CAD system. So I think they got some of that worked out today, and it just is a muscle memory thing. I think the officers are learning to use. That seems to be one of the kind of things that I've been hearing is they'll get out of their car on, two people arguing or whatever, and they haven't trained to hit that button yet to get that encounter. Would it be very useful for us, right? But overall, I think pretty good.
Are officers up for it and ready to go?
I'm sure some are, and some who are older are gonna be like, I'm gonna need more training. The younger folks are way, they're more versed in.
I'm talking about kind of attitude-wise, is it
No, I
something
think,
that received as
overall, I
positive?
think, it's kind of an industry standard thing now, so, in the benefits, I think, they see the benefits of it.
I was just saying that at this conference, I asked a lot of people about body-worn cameras, and I didn't talk to a single person who was not for body-worn cameras, even for their command. As a matter of fact, a lot of people seemed to be shocked when I told the Berkeley we didn't have it yet.
Right.
And it was almost like, of course we want those.
Yeah. So I no serious pushback that I'm hearing about at all, other than just kind of some of the glitches and working through some of the equipment glitches.
When you say muscle memory, are people actually using them yet, or?
We've had a trial, we've got a couple of officers doing a trial run to kind of get those things kind of worked out before we push it out to the masses. So,
Have you taken the training yet?
I took the training like you guys took the training, so I'm
okay.
gonna have
You
to be
haven't had the-
updated,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
You're one of the ones who need a little more time.
I am totally upfront and honest. I am technically challenged, so I am not fast with my fingers on the phone. Yeah. But so overall, I think it's
Sergeant Bolero, have you taken the training, or were you using one, or are you playing clothes all the time?
I took the training originally when I was on patrol in uniform, but that was a few months ago. But now that I'm no longer in uniform, I will not be using it unless I work an assignment which requires me to be in uniform.
Yeah.
So anyway, hopefully that's good news for everyone here. And so staffing report, we are at 157. That's not operational. That's just kind of where we're at. That doesn't include the folks that count, like who are in the academy, who are in our field training program, folks who are out for family leave or injury, that kind of thing. I did not have an opportunity to count up operationally where we're at right now. But I will say, to kind of piggyback off the staffing issue, so I wasn't at a conference last week. I was actually at school. I'm in management school right now, which every lieutenant's required to go through. And so I'm in class with agencies from all over California, really, and the big topic is staffing. So we are not alone. Everybody is kind of challenged in this whole staffing issue and this staffing problem. So it kind of felt good to at least be in good company.
The chief said he was putting together a group to open the pipeline.
Yeah,
How's
that is up and
going?
running.
What's
Yeah.
that look like?
So there are at least 2 full-time dedicated now, and this is in addition to our normal personnel and training staff. And then a couple of folks are helping out kind of on a part-time basis. So we haven't totally got it fully up and running, but we have folks who are actively working on our marketing, our outreach, trying to get the testing process, faster. So it's going. It's, actually, this is one of the quickest things that I've seen come together, so. But it'll take time. These things don't happen quickly.
Okay,
That's,
Is that great?
that's it, yeah.
Any word on the Police Officers Association?
I
Trying to renew the request.
Yeah, I will bring it forward to them. I know that they've been pulled in many different directions, and so it could be just a flat-out staffing kind of issue on who, because they have other things they've been dealing with too, so.
Thanks.
Commissioner Ramsey, I've also emailed Sergeant Steins, I haven't heard back, but I communicated the commission's desire to have a BPA representative at our meetings.
Are there any more questions?
Just one, I mean, and not advocating for this, but when we implemented the body worn cameras, both the sheriff's department and the BART, the commission was engaged by the chief of police in having some kind of like a period of time in which necessarily is a pass, but it was a waiver system, because what we found in both departments that the harder thing to do was the pressing the button to get
Turn
the
it
camera
on.
going.
Yeah.
And because that is a direct violation of the general order, we found it that the 30, 60, 90 period from the moment of the implementation, and I'm not advocating that for the commission, that's a discussion for the commission to have, but both BART and the police and the sheriff's department, in conjunction with the Public Safety Commission and the BPCRB, reached an agreement in which it understood that there was a period of time in which that was going to create a muscle memory problem, and it did not create a default problem for police officers and allegations against them, take consideration of the seriousness of whatever the complaint might have been.
Right.
That there was a conversation with the PRC about what it would look like, so that we would understand that in the training process, police officers have to get used to the equipment before they are 100% held fully accountable for that muscle practice of just activating the camera when they engage in any and all engagements with the public. So that's something that we can probably add to the agenda sometime if it's needed, or engage the chief in to have a conversation about what that would look like if that's what we're going to do.
And what was BART's, what was their kind of training period?
It was a 90-day period.
90?
It was a 90-day period, which if Rainey at the time, Mark Smith, which is the Inspector General of the LA Police Department now, Russell Bloom, which is the OIPA for BART, used to be a commissioner in this commission, was part of the program in which there is a higher level of visual into the police department of BART. And so the agreement was 90 days. If there a police officer forgot to engage it, they didn't have camera recording, but they still did the report on the CAT report and everything else, that was a supervisory conversation instead of automatically being a much higher
Complaint.
default of discipline. But at the 90-day, it became obvious that after 90 days, it was over. The excuses are no longer valid. You need to press that button.
Do you know what the auditing process will be to determine whether folks are actually using the cameras or not during particular encounters with the public?
I don't, not off the top, I don't.
Yeah, I would be interested in that. That was one thing I'd
Okay.
say the committee would ignore, and having a process in place to be able to determine use some percentage, a random evaluation of videos across particular areas to determine what percentage of, or how frequently the cameras are actually being used in encounters, and even specific as to squads of people or so forth, so can be emphasized in training or other work.
The difference between the PRC and the BPCRB, for every single encounter the police officer has and has a report, there has to be a video. There has to be, there is no excuse. And because the OIPA, as the investigatory arm of BART, has the ability to look into those to make sure that they match, every single encounter has a video next to it, it's an easier thing to do. For us here, not having the ability to look in from an oversight point of view, I think we'll have to talk sooner or later of having to request from the department a report on how many instances after whatever personal time there is that police officers are either failing to activate or they're not activated and the reasons why. And that should be documented somewhere, particularly as it relates to detentions and uses of force. And that's a much bigger conversation. But I think that's the next stage as we move forward in terms of this camera.
Are there any further questions? Yes.
I noticed yesterday for the first time across the street from the public safety building, near the corner, a tall pole with something on the end of it that looked like a speaker, or didn't look like a microphone, but maybe it is. Is that?
I
Any
don't know,
Okay.
I'll look at it,
Okay.
I have no idea what
It's
it's
on the side of Center Street where the Veterans Building is.
okay, it's on Center?
Yeah, center almost to MLK.
Sorry, I got radio.
Center almost at MLK.
Center and MLK. Okay, I'll take a look at it, I
Yeah.
don't know.
It's attached with a, metal wire to a pre-existing pole that's there. It's interesting. And there's some sort of box as well, so,
Okay.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I have no idea.
I mean, it may or may not be BPD. I mean, maybe it's out there counting traffic, I don't know. but,
Well, I
yeah.
do know on just south of Alston, they're doing a traffic analysis. I
Mhm.
saw that they ran the cables across,
Mhm.
and I saw, it looked like what appeared to me, traffic engineers out there. Now, this is my assumption, I don't know for sure, so it could
Well,
be that.
the cables across the street is something more familiar. This is something I've never seen before.
Okay.
in Berkeley. Thank you.
Do you just want to do a time check? Are there any last questions before we move on? No? All right, thank you for your report. We can move on to the subcommittee reports. We have the homeless encampment subcommittee. You have it, Mathew.
The homeless encampment subcommittee, well, I'm interested to, I noticed that we were given no, the homeless subcommittee has not met. And our meeting was contingent upon receiving a copy of the city's most recent policies or what their enforcement practices are in light of recent court decisions. What I do notice is that on page 111, a special order from the police was issued. And that seems to be some sort of policy. I don't really understand, I don't know how to contextualize a special order. It looks like it's from Lexipol, but so I don't know what to make of it. I don't get who's making the laws, who's interpreting the law at this point. I can't tell if it's the city manager, if it's the chief, I can't tell who's doing it. But why didn't we get any direct response to our
No, I didn't.
information request?
I did not either. I will say with respect to the special order that, if I remember correctly, the chief said that it was done in consultation with the city attorney's office.
Do you know,
to-
it's just, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm
Well,
sorry to interrupt.
it's expressly, in reaction to the recent Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decision.
So when I'm trying to understand what a homeless subcommittee might do, a homeless subcommittee might provide input on policy and bring it to this body. what seems to happen is that it's sort of, I keep having this like horses out of the barn kind of feeling. That whatever we do is sort of a moot point relative to what's being done.
Well, I would disagree with that. The homeless subcommittee still could meet and make suggestions on this. I think the reason, Lieutenant Hockey can correct me if I'm wrong, I think a special order is something that's done when there's immediate need to put
Correct.
something in place. And I think because of the court decision, it's the chief's intent to make sure that that our officers are complying with, or not in violation of the decision of the court. And so that's why it's done quickly.
So I guess, I'm just not understanding how our city works. This was not in response to your information request.
No, this is not in response to the information. This was given to me, this was sent to me by the chief to distribute to the PRC. That's separate from the request that you made at the last meeting.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how to impact or influence how the PRC might input into this process.
Mm-hmm. It just seems to me that common sense would say if a new law comes out, then you want the officers to understand how this affects what they're doing on the street, and you don't want them to violate the court decision.
But I guess,
Because if you want to give input on that relates to the homeless.
all I'm trying to figure out, is this separate from what the information request we made? Like, is this the same document
No,
responsive?
no.
So are there two things happening?
Your request was for me to ask the deputy city manager or the city manager what was the status of policies related to homeless people pending the new administrative regulation that's coming out. And as it turns out, I had forgotten amendment to the Berkeley Municipal Code. That's separate from and I had told you, I think I had reported actually to the commission at the last meeting that those two pieces, the administrative regulation and the amendments, were about ready to go when the court decision came out, so they were pulled back to make sure that they conformed with the court's decision, or to revise them to conform to the court's decision.
So we have,
My understanding was this was on a separate track, which is specifically, this is specifically geared to what are police officers doing, because the homeless, there are many other resources of the city, as you're well aware, that go into dealing with homelessness. So that's separate from just this specific police department order.
yeah.
And so it was a coincidence that this came out at the time that you had made that request. And I think I.
Do we expect a response to that request?
I don't know. I'm gonna have a meeting with them tomorrow, so I'll ask. With the
Could you just do me a favor, could you just get them to give a yes or no?
Yes or no what?
That they will or will not respond?
Oh, okay.
Because that would help me out a lot.
Okay,
I appreciate that, thank you.
okay.
That is your report. Okay, I'm gonna ask that we move on to 9A and then come back to the other subcommittee, if that's all right. I'm realizing that this clock is a little slow, so it's actually past 8 p.m.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, that clock is slow.
So Commissioner Prichett, if you wanna address it.
So we have on our agenda, We're on 9A, review policy on body worn cameras, including sufficiency provisions on use of associated iPhone. So, in reading the proposed, the new policy, body worn camera policy, there is not a lot of discussion or reference to the iPhones that were distributed to members of the department and how those work in conjunction and what access officers have via the iPhones and so forth. Issues of whether or not, separation of witnesses or just how accounts are gathered. So I thought it would be helpful to ask Mr. Chanin to come and share some of what he knows about how footage is handled from his work with the Oakland Police Department and the policies that they created. So I was hopeful that he could maybe give us an overview and answer some questions. Mr. Chanin, would you be willing to do that?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Can I move over here?
Please come.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all for inviting me. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jim Chanin. I worked on the campaign for the Police Review Commission, and I was on the first commission in 1973 through 1977, and then again 1979 and 1980. I was twice chair of the commission. In 1980, I moved to Oakland, where I currently live. I want to talk about the BPD Policy 424, which is a Lexipol policy. If you look at the bottom, and I want to also talk about a letter that Chief Greenwood sent to Kathy Lee on February 12th, 2008, Catherine Lee, 2018, which describes the iPhone usage in conjunction with the body-worn camera footage.
Page 17.
I don't know if you all have that. I'm not going to quote from the letter much, but the policy has no reference to the iPhone whatsoever. And as far as I know, there is no regulation on the iPhone's use in the Berkeley Police Department at the current time. So here's some questions that I have about the iPhone. Can you email the footage to your home computer and use it to review for some sort of department situation? Can you show it to your fellow officers when you're writing your reports? In other words, can you email or show your footage to your fellow officer, and then you all write your reports together in effect? That is extremely bad practice. It's not done in any department that I know of, but it's a terrible practice because it allows the police to get their story together when it may not be together, when it may have inconsistencies that deserve to be explored. And I'm not saying that the officers always lie or anything like this. I'm talking simple evidence gathering, the same standards the officers would use if people took pictures of a crime scene and then showed it to each other before they were interviewed by the police. It's really the same thing. And there's no regulation of these iPhones whatsoever, no restrictions at all. It's not clear to me whether there are going to be restrictions, but no matter what is the case, the use of the iPhone should be woven into the Lexipol policy on body-worn cameras, and then reviewed by the Police Review Commission. So you can weigh in on whether you think it's an appropriate use of this iPhone or not. You did weigh in on a third document I want to discuss, which is a proposed Berkeley Police Department general order, which was used on or about May 25th, 2016 at a PRC meeting here. I don't know what happened to that policy, proposed policy, but I do know it sharply differs from the proposed BPD policy in critical ways. One way, by the way, in Oakland, we don't allow officers to review their body-worn camera footage prior to writing their reports at all. There might be exceptions, but I can't think of any sitting here right now on short notice. And if I find out any, I'll be sure and let Ms. Lee know, because I want to be as accurate as possible when I report to you. But as far as I know, it's not allowed. Your proposed PRC policy says that any incident involving the use of force, that the officer cannot review their body-worn camera footage in advance. That's very different from the proposed BPD policy, which says members may review recording. This is on page 5, 424.17. Members may review recordings as an evidentiary resource, with the single exception of officer-involved incidents involving grave bodily injury or death. It's my contention, and it was yours to a significant degree, that exception should be the rule. In other words, that officers should not review their body-worn camera footage before writing their reports. The PRC draft of the policy that I have had a very ingenious compromise to whether the officers should see the footage or not prior to writing the report. And the draft that I had, it was this, that the involved member would be given an opportunity, that's a police officer, to supplement his or her statement in a separate document. In other words, they could review the body-worn camera footage after writing their initial report. And then if they left something out or wanted to add something on the basis of the footage, that would be okay under the proposed PRC policy. And I think that's a very interesting compromise to this problem. Another thing that I noticed in the BPD policy was a total double standard regarding taping citizens, including witnesses and victims, and taping fellow officers. On the one hand, police are allowed to surreptitiously record virtually anyone they want, and they have discretion not to. But they can, and that includes victims and witnesses specifically, which is on page 4. Members have no obligation to advise a victim or witness that he or she is being recorded, but may do so at their discretion. When a witness or when a victim or witness requests they not be recorded, members may consider their request. I want to back up and talk about what the standard has been in California for the last 58 years. In 1960, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the case of Matt versus Ohio that one-way recordings were permissible. In other words, if you're in Arizona, you can tape somebody without their consent. The California legislature, which I believe was certainly not very Democratic and possibly Republican, was so incensed by that decision that they made it a felony, which it still is, 632 of the Penal Code, to tape someone without their consent surreptitiously. In other words, if I were to talk to someone outside this room and tape record their conversation, that would be a felony under California law, even though it's legal in the other states under Matt versus Ohio. And that's been the case and been upheld for 632, I think, of the Penal Code, and some more follow that. So the use of body-worn cameras is new territory for the state of California, and it's new territory that we have to be very careful. Don't violate citizens' rights for no reason whatsoever. And it's particularly interesting in this policy that the department is so clear about the recording of department members. And I quote under 424.10, members shall not surreptitiously record another department member without a court order unless lawfully authorized by the chief of police or his or her designee. So it's okay to record anybody else, but your fellow officer, and that requires a court order or an order of the chief of police. Now, I was very pro body-worn camera when it was introduced in Oakland. I thought it was a great idea. I still think it's a great idea. We've had body-worn cameras in Oakland since 2011, and the uses of force have gone down. Excessive force has gone down. Complaints have gone down, and there are a number of things that have gone down because the officer knows that what they're doing is being recorded. At the same time, we haven't had excessive threats to officer safety, which is very important. We have to remember officer safety, and knock on wood, we haven't had an egregious event involving officer safety because of the rules we have on body-worn cameras in Oakland. So I want to make that clear. I think that the policies discussion on crowd control is pretty good. I think there's appropriate respect for demonstrators and the First Amendment rights, and there are other policies in the city that deal with undercover reporting of political groups that are captured to some degree in the Berkeley Police Department policy. So that's a good thing. I think, let me just look through my notes, I think that's about it. Yeah, there's one other thing. To strengthen relationships between police and citizens, members may use discretion regarding the recording of informal, non-enforcement related interactions with members of the community. On its face, that's a good thing. I think as time goes on, your board's inquiry will see if that's being abused. And the same thing with cessation of recording on page 5, 42411. D, an officer can cease recording, quote, in the member's judgment if a recording would interfere with his or her ability to conduct an investigation. That's also subject to abuse. And I think we'll have to see as time goes forward whether it's properly used or not. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna open it up to, just for a time check, like 5 to 10 questions, 5 minutes questions. Yeah.
So, is it possible to extend the 5 minutes per person or total?
Let's say 10 minutes total.
Well, so
We'll see how it is.
can we just sort of, as a baseline, what are we doing here? Are we reviewing the policy super notes? Are we commenting on Mr. Chanin's helpful presentation? What are we doing?
My understanding is that, I just got the policy this week from the police department with its revisions.
I sent it
The whole-
Friday the 28th, the same day I got it.
Friday the 28th of September.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'm sorry.
10 days.
I've had 10 days. I haven't, since the last meeting, we have not had it.
Correct.
Okay.
So my understanding is that we still have an opportunity to comment on it since this is our first opportunity to do that. So if we're not allowed to make changes to it, please tell me now.
Well, I think our role with respect to this is probably the same as with every other thing that we, comment on or offer, our perspective on. It's our perspective, it is advisory, it's informal, it can be accepted or rejected by the weight of its persuasiveness or power. So, I don't.
Is that
yeah.
clear up for you?
Does it clear it up?
You were asking what we're doing.
So we're reviewing the policy, broadly? Okay. So I would humbly suggest that 10 minutes is probably not enough to do that.
Oh, so I meant 10 minutes, like maybe I would just ask commissioners to keep in mind that Mr. Chanin has given us his
Okay,
time.
I
So
got it.
ask him your questions first before we talk more broadly about the policy.
Okay, so, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the presentation. Commissioner Roberts and I were on the subcommittee that developed, painstakingly spent a lot of hours developing a PRC proposal, which it's hard to find vestiges of in the now Lexipol branded policy that the department is adopting, or in the process of adopting. There's a lot to be said about it, and many aspects of it, but I just wanted to kind of get at a couple of factual assertions and factual predicates so we can have some kind of common ground. So in terms of, the issue that you raised about review of recordings prior to writing reports, that's something that we grappled with for a long time. You called it an ingenious solution. It was one that we came up with, it was one that had not been adopted by any agency that we were able to find in the country. And I would say, disappointingly, the proposal that the Lexipol policy that allows basically unlimited review of recordings prior to report writing or at any time is standard across dozens or actually hundreds of police agencies across the country. I was looking while we were talking here. There's a November 2017 Leadership Conference scorecard on body-worn camera policies where they sort of line up the policies around the country. And it's just, almost uniform that policies allow that kind of review at any time, like the Lexipol policy. I think it's not a good policy as a sort of policy matter, but just so we all have the same kind of facts here, that's the standard. In terms of addressing issues about whether or not footage from the body-worn cameras can be emailed or otherwise transmitted to home computers, the hypothetical you posed. The policy does seem to address it at 424.13, where it prohibits DWCs for personal use or for making personal copies of recordings created while on duty or acting at their capacities, which is helpful, to the point that to the prospect that you were raising. Another issue in terms of the surreptitious reporting. Again, not something that I support as a policy matter, but something that I think has long been accepted in the law, under the law, as, on the basis of individuals in public don't have an expectation of privacy, don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy, and their recordings and their interactions with police can be recorded by the police, whether it is by an audio recording device or a camera or otherwise. I don't know that to be a practice that is prohibited by California law. I think the issue, it's not. Is that what you said?
I don't think it is.
You don't think so,
I
okay.
researched that myself.
Right.
There's stuff going both ways, but I don't think it is.
I'm sorry, the practice was,
Surreptitious reporting.
you don't think that's prohibited?
I do not.
It is
Yeah.
not.
Fair enough.
Not under police officers in the exercise
I'm
of,
sorry?
not for police officers in the exercise of their lawful duties. AB 66 passed. There's also other cases that determine in California police officers have the right to record.
Penal Code 633, and there's a law enforcement exception to,
Yep.
for two-party consent. I mean, you'd be able to do undercover recordings,
Yeah.
you couldn't do it. You can do undercover.
Different opinions, but the law is the law.
So at any rate, the presentation was framed in terms of, I think in the beginning, in terms of the technology at issue, in terms of the iPhones, and I agree, the policy doesn't address that. To me, the policy considerations are sort of divorced from the technological choice, whether it's an iPhone or an Android or some other thing that we're going to be talking about in 3 years, because it's going to become the sort of standard that everybody has in their pocket. There are a lot of policy choices made in the Lexipol policy that I think are problematic. I'm going to sort of wind down by saying that I'm not sure how we're addressing those in a sort of substantive way, but those are just points to respond to what Mr. Chanin said.
Could I respond to you? Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, you're absolutely right about the policy. The majority of policies do allow review of body-worn camera footage. There are cities that don't. Oakland is one of them. And I think it's better practice. And I don't think that the fact that a lot of other police departments are doing it is the end of the discussion.
Right.
Secondly, when you talked about 424.13, that, and to some degree you're right about that, but my point was there's no weaving of the use of the iPhone into the policy at all. And I just think that that's not good. There's no iPhone policy in the Berkeley Police Department, a standalone policy at all either. And I don't think that's a good thing either. I just think there have to be some clear regulations about how these things are used, if they're going to be used in the manner that appears to be the case.
Can I ask a question? Does Oakland utilize iPhone?
No.
What sort of software do they use to
I don't,
manage the data that's,
to review the footage?
not just review it, yeah, but to review it, to download it, to archive it?
I don't know.
They put the camera in the, they put the camera on the, it's like.
Are there specific policies related to that software?
At the end of the shift, they put the camera, they put the body-worn cameras on a receptacle and just
I
download
get that,
automatically.
but my interest is, I can understand.
No, that's because it's the body-worn camera itself, and the policy on the body-worn camera is covered in the policy on the body-worn camera. This is a separate thing, this iPhone, that to the best of my knowledge, does not exist in Oakland. And
I'm trying to understand what the concern about the iPhone is. I assume that it has to be related to the software that's being used to manage the evidence.
the concern,
Is it something different than that?
the concern is, I don't know, there's a lot that I don't know. I'm more raising questions than I'm making accusations and statements. It seems to me, from using my iPhone, that you can email parts of your film to someone else.
So that
It
is-
seems to me, using my iPhone, that you can just show the footage to someone else. There's nothing in the Berkeley policy that forbids either of those things, except what the other commissioner said here.
So I'm just trying to understand, and not trying to contest or anything, I'm just trying to understand whether the concern is iPhone specific, or whether the concern is just showing copies of the recordings to other people, or making copies of them, or emailing them, be it iPhone or not. Or if it's, you can get on a desktop and email to someone. So my interest is just knowing whether or not your concerns are iPhone specific, or whether they're just concerns about the actions that officers might take.
Well, obviously, it's number two, but in this case, they use the iPhone, so that's why I'm honing in on the iPhones.
Commissioner Roberts.
Just a couple things. One comment on that. I think basically, this is an introduction of a new gizmo into the process that wasn't there when we first looked at it before. And it's about either viewing the tapes, and then questions, what can you do with the gizmo, whether it's an iPhone or not. I think that really is the issue here, that we had to look at before the commission. But just stepping back a minute, in Ari's point about what are we doing here? I appreciate your presentation, though, and I think it was very well thought through and all that, so I appreciate the feedback. But let me, as a commission where we've been, Ari and I, as you mentioned, spent a hell of a lot of time on this, and eventually George was involved in presenting to the council with us. And Lieutenant Joe Okies was involved in a lot, so the police department participated. And but back in 2017, when we did this has been like a year and a half ago now, we got it down. We basically had a BPD version, we had a PRC version. There were four things we took issue with, and they're outlined in here somewhere. I won't go through them all. I can if you want. But and so we've been waiting to see the policy come back to us from what BPD wants to do. So now we have it for the last 10 days or so. And so, we need to go through it. And in my view, number one, see how they treated the 4 issues. And number 2 is see if they add any other things that weren't there before we, after we looked at the thing. That's really our job, I think.
Do we still have the subcommittee operation?
I mean, it was disbanded.
Do we have one?
It was disbanded.
It was disbanded.
Yeah, it was disbanded. But we brought it to the commission, there was there were discussions, and after the commission looked at it, it went with the 4 issues. The iPhone one wasn't one of them because we didn't even know at that point what kind of technology we were gonna use. So, I think that's fair game for looking at this point, because it does have implications in my mind. So it seems to me, we should set up some kind of process to say, well, let's look at the 4 issues, let's compare the original PRC version to the new version, see if the police have added new sections that we hadn't got a chance to review before.
Or did it?
And then somehow get through that and come back to the commission and say, okay, now what do you want to do with it? I mean, that's basically it. One last thing, the chief owes us a report that would show what changed from the original versions. And we haven't gotten that yet, so it would be helpful to get that. But, it is still a bit of a process we have to work through to get there. We're not gonna be able to debate each issue, tonight.
Can I
So
move
before-
under 9C?
I'm sorry.
Can I make a motion under 9C to constitute a subcommittee to review the 4 topics on the iPhone issue?
So before we get into how we want to move forward, I just want to ask if there are any last questions for Mr. Chanin, who is here. Just like policy-wise or?
Do you want to leave?
I just have one thing I forgot to, could I say?
Yes.
Okay. My notes of what you guys did in, I think it was 2016, believe it or not.
17 really was what.
17?
Yeah.
Okay. Was that Sergeant Oakey's, in the discussion with you all, he said that the prohibition of review prior to writing the initial report should be limited to officer-involved shootings, in-custody death, and use of force consistent with what some agencies refer to as level 1 or categorical use of force. The new policy of the department does not adopt what even Sergeant Oakey's wanted. And I just wanted to point that out.
Well, just on that point, we disagreed with the department on that. And one of the items we went forward with was that it was a state of mind report before they could view the review the tapes. And then, as Mr. Chanin noted, later, after they review the tape, the officer could put in an amended form of their report to see if they took issue with the tape. I mean, that's kind of it. We still don't, as a commission, previously, the commission did not agree with what the police department was going with.
Oh, no, I
We
know
wanted the
that.
state of mind report.
My point
So-
is that Sergeant Oakey's is.
Well, the
took
department
more
hasn't wanted that
view.
from the beginning. It wasn't just Sergeant Oakey's, and now he's Lieutenant Oakey's.
Sorry.
The department hasn't wanted that from the beginning for various reasons I won't go into now.
I would just say the staggered approach was something that was talked about at the body worn session at the IACP convention conference. So it wasn't, it didn't seem to be completely foreign to the rest of the country.
Just staggered in terms of.
Having a report, and they talked about primacy, in terms of, there was something about having primacy and then having a supplemental report out.
I'm gonna support your proposal to reconstitute, a subcommittee to look at some of these issues, because I feel very, it's weird to feel rushed after a 2-year delay or however long it's been, but that's where we're at. But I have to say, there's some, in terms, I wanna step back and look at the big picture of policing in Berkeley. If we were gonna say that the emphasis of the strategy of policing in Berkeley relates to the ability of the police solve, to investigate and to solve crime. And I believe that's dependent upon the relationships and the relations that they're able to create and maintain and foster with the community. When I read this policy, and in light of recent events, i.e., the discussions where the chief and Lieutenant Files explained to us that for decades, the police department has been making secret, shall we say, surreptitious recordings of traffic stops and who knows what else. And then we realized that some members of the press have access to those. And so as a member of the public, if I was considering like, gosh, I want to talk to this cop about this or that, oh shoot, but it might find its way on the front page of Berkeley side. Do you understand how that erodes relationships or how that erodes the possibility of trust? You know, I really feel like in the big picture, when I see, well, officers may, but why not tell somebody that they're recording you? Why not have that part of the policy? That if you're a witness, then the officers may or may not tell you that you're being recorded. If you're, I mean, it's just kind of mind-blowing. And please don't interrupt me, Commissioner. Just let me have my little rant for a second. Thank you. Appreciate it. I'll comment on here. Look, I'm a member of the public. I'm not a lawyer. And I'm telling you that if the point of a police department is to solve crime and build relations with the community, there's a lot in this policy that makes some folks not want to have anything to do with them. You know, I wouldn't want to I think back on conversations that I've had with officers, I don't want that on the front page of Berkeley side. You know, at least if I know I'm being recorded, I can make a decision. But this is like, it's creepy. This policy, you know, if you want a little commentary, it's creepy. Commissioner, you can take the floor.
I mean, I think that, I think we need to take a breath here. I think that, obviously, my opinion is, we need to agendize this as a possible creation of a subcommittee. I think we need to require from the chief to send us the red line version so that we can compare what's here now against what we presented to them, so we can have a clear picture of what changes are, deletions if any, and we can have a conversation and structure it next time. And I think we can come back and, because our discussions or whatever we think is missing, not missing, is to be added, then we can certainly send a letter to the chief saying to him, this is what we think needs to be added. I don't have a lot of concerns about this. I believe that police officers have the right to record you, and people can have it both ways. You cannot ask for accountability, accessibility, transparency, and say you cannot record me. It doesn't work that way. But I do have a problem with the fact that this is not in line with the LA Police Department, LA Sheriff's Department, and the ACLU recommendations that recording should not stop until the interaction is finished with the member of the public. That's a concern to me, and I think that I need to address that as a full conversation, because we had that before. And I don't know of any police department in California that doesn't have it as a requirement, because I represent 3 with this one. So I know the other 2 police departments that I work with have it. So that's a concern. But I think that we can just pick little we want and go in different directions, and that's okay. But I think we need to see our original, the changes, and then decide what it is that they change, delete, and they take action. A subcommittee will take too long. We're just looking to see what's happening within our order. But what we can do is see what's different and what we have a problem with, and demand for the chief to come back and answer those questions. I think that that's a good process.
Do you think we should not have a subcommittee?
I think the subcommittee took 1.5 years. If we just took it too long. But if we review what we have and what they presented, and we say, these are, according to those 4 points that we had, there were concerns, and their addition 2 are solved, but 2 are not solved, and then we find these 2 other concerns as well, and we said back to the department, this is what we see with this that we are still in disagreement with, we can have a much more substantive conversation. I think that's the way we should proceed.
Honestly, that's something.
Correct.
Yeah.
I can come back afterwards, but
Sorry,
I just have a couple of comments one, I agree with you totally regarding the cessation of the recording, and I appreciate your bringing us that to our attention for 2411D. It does seem right for the possibility of abuse, just to say, in the member's judgment, a recording would interfere with his or her ability to conduct an investigation. But I do agree with George in terms of, I just think there's obviously surreptitious recordings, state law allows for it. There's all sorts of situations in which the police surreptitiously record those. I can't think practically how you could have a rule that says that the police have to tell you all the time that they're being recorded. You know, if there's a police chase or, you know, or some event where they're reacting right away, in somewhat adversarial or confrontational. I can't see how a police officer would suddenly have to give notice to every person that they're recording. And as far as victims and witnesses, I do think 424.8 seems to address what you're talking about. And it says witnesses in the event of crime witness or a member of the community wishes to report or discuss criminal activity anonymously, they have the discretion not to record. It says for victims, upon request by the victims, and again, officers have the discretion not to record.
Which means they may still record.
I understand that, but, so, I do think these are issues to discuss. I'm willing to support it either on a subcommittee or otherwise. I don't want to do something that would delay this, to the point of 6 months or a year. So I can make the motion, but people, if there's a substitute motion for it, I would. So my motion is I move that we constitute a subcommittee to allow discussion of the 4 areas that are differences and also the iPhone issue, even though quite frankly, I don't think there's an iPhone specific issue, but I want to include that too. If someone thinks doesn't want to second that, that's fine, or someone wants a better proposal, let's go with that.
So there is a motion, is there a second?
I'll second it. And I just like to remind us that, yes, state law is one thing, we're talking about policy. So I just wanna, I do like the idea because I think we need to actually include the public in these conversations. And again, I resent feeling rushed when we only got the version 10 days ago. Now we're supposed to be in a big hurry and curtail the whole purpose of why the PRC exists.
Well, the subcommittee meetings are public meetings. If I could just offer a friendly amendment, just to add, and any other new provisions that the department has added since we got to look at the ordinance. That's, for example, the iPhone was one of them, but there are others I noticed in there that are new.
I would agree with that. I would be curious though if people agree with George or not as to whether there should, whether it should be more streamlined and we shouldn't have the extra step of a subcommittee.
Just 1 second, Ms. Lee, yeah.
Yes, so, I'm throwing this out there to see if it changes the conversation or affects the conversation about whether or not you want to have a subcommittee. So, as staff support, what I did do was I did a quick read and saw how the policy fell out on those 4 issues. Had I had the time, I would have done a deeper dive into the details, but as you know, I was gone for 4 days last week, so I did not have time to do that. But certainly, I'm willing to do that, and I don't know if that affects whether or not we want to have a subcommittee.
I'm sorry, you're willing to do it?
To
An analysis of the 4
an
issues.
analysis of the 4 issues and point out, well, first I would pester the chief for what he promised, that short of that, I can be the one who goes through and compares our last policy with the one that's been just there.
If I may, I'm strongly supportive of that point, because I think that if we try to line up our last policy with this one, it's just, if you're doing a red line, it'll be a wash in red. I mean, there isn't a ton of similarity in what we're, in the language, in the wording. What we're looking for are a dozen or a dozen and a half key issues, and how this policy falls on those.
Right.
And some analysis, somebody, Ms. Lee, taking a look at that, as opposed to us in a subcommittee over the course of 4 months, or God forbid, as a full body, over the course of, however many meetings. I think that's a very, very good suggestion and a very good idea.
If I might add real quick, because we said to city council, no general order, no implementation of body worn cameras. I know because I sat there and I said it to them for 2 years, right? So that's a dynamic of which we're operating. Then now we have a body worn camera general order that went to the police department, it went to the union to be vetted, to have their opinions, to have changes of one. So now it comes back to us, right? So we're running against that dynamic of October 22nd, the implementation, everything else. So I think that just in the light of that, we need to do the path of least resistance, see what the differences are, have a discussion, and say what we are. If not, we're not gonna implement it because we said to city council, no general order, no implementation. So if we're saying we're gonna do a subcommittee for 8 months, in which we're gonna just have a protracted discussion of the general order, and according to what we said to city council, no implementation of body worn cameras, so we're gonna stop it for another year. That doesn't seem to me the smart thing to do. The smart thing would be to do this comparative and have a broad discussion, and if we find any discrepancies, present them accordingly.
So I would support the comparative as well, but I do have a question about, our role here, and say we get this next meeting and we do, make comments on it, how is that going to affect what the department does and when they roll it out? Like, are they going to postpone rolling it out? It seems like they're pretty set on October 20th or 22nd.
But
Yeah,
you're,
does
but,
anybody-
but you're right, see, but it is postponed, is it a postponement to what we look at everything and have these meetings, and when can we meet, having committees, the subcommittee come in and talk to the commission, or do we do our due diligence, 3 days, 5 days, 10 days, I read it at NACOLE, I read it by sitting on a panel. I mean, you do the due diligence, you do your work, you do your job, you come back with a comparative, Ms. Lee can give us about how long it'll take for her to do so. And then we come back here with our ideas and we send to city council and we say to the chief, we still have this 1, 2, or 3 concerns and we think that those have to be changed. And we raise the bar to city council and to the police department saying, this ACLU, this disconnection of the cameras when cannot stop recording, it's a no-go for us. And it needs to be implemented accordingly. And we'll find that somewhere, some things will go our way, some things will go our way. We just have to figure out which ones are the ones, and this seems to me to be the quickest path to get there.
Just,
Commissioner Robbins.
just one other point. I understand the issue of the course of least resistance. But number one is if we run across items that are in there, I mean, I think we're gonna want a dialogue with the department at some point. Like, why did you do that? Why, what was this about? So there's some level of process in there. And number two is, this isn't necessarily, while I think we ought to turn it around, it isn't going to necessarily be a sprint, because it's going to be maybe a 440 run or something like that, because this, this policy was negotiated and approved through the city manager and the department and the BPA. So changes to it would have to go back through the same process. Now, we could stand up early and say, hey, wave red flags, which I think is important to do in the short term. But thinking that somehow we're gonna make changes and this in 2 weeks or something isn't gonna happen.
But again, it depends what are the points that are non-conversation, So we say, well, okay, we understand the iPhone doesn't, honestly, maybe we can, I had a conversation on NACOLE with another police department who uses the iPhone, and I expressed this concern, maybe we can reach out to NACOLE to see if they can tell us what department it is uses the iPhone capability as well, because the community had that concern as well, and it was proven to be false. I know this is a fact, it's a conversation, we can probably reach out to that.
But you don't remember what yours.
I'm gonna have to think really hard on that. But I think which ones are non-negotiable points? I mean, if we say that out of our comparative, there are 5 things of concern and 2 are non-negotiable, we can certainly stand our ground. And
Yeah,
our
sure.
ground, and we're standing ground on things that are specific and valid and that are in line with other police departments in the Bay Area, I think that city council will listen. And I can tell you, I will make city council listen. particularly on this issue about the disconnection of the cameras. I think it's important. But
Yeah.
broader considerations, nitpicking on things like this, it might not necessarily be broader in terms of how it affects the recording and operation. We might have to prioritize. We might just have to.
Ms. Lee, you had-
I just wanted to clarify what you were saying, Commissioner Perez-Velas, because it almost sounded like you're saying that the body worn cameras couldn't be used unless there was a policy that the PRC approved of, and that's not what I understood. I mean, they have to have a policy in place.
That's right. So if we're gonna hold this process by saying you're not gonna implement it because we're gonna have a subcommittee for 6 to 8
I
months.
don't think we.
That's right.
I don't
So-
think we have that
So,
power.
but our conversation with City Council, and it's on the record, no general order, no implementation of City Council was in
Right.
agreement with that.
But it's no general order approved by the PRC?
That's right.
Or just, okay,
But that's, so if we're saying that general order is not a general order because we're gonna create a
Okay.
subcommittee, we're going back against that process that we had, a subcommittee that created this, and it was passed on to City Council, City Attorney. So we just, I think this path, and I know we're beating this dead flower to the end, I think this path is the right thing to do against your subcommittee.
Did you make a proposal?
No, well, Ms. Lee is making a proposal to, instead of, Ms. Lee proposed to the makers of the subcommittee, makers of the motion to the committee, to reconsider the motion to create a subcommittee in lieu of a comparative, report by the PRC officer delineating those changes that exist.
I really, no, I want you guys to decide what you're gonna do, but I was throwing out a bit of
Sure.
information, which is what I'm willing to do in case that affects how you decide to get to the end.
Commissioner Allaby?
I would first like to see a copy of the changes that we have requested. I don't have that, and I don't know if anyone else has it. Since it's been,
The four?
yeah, I would like to see that, what we put forward to the chief. Because we're gonna have, if we are going to have, Ms. Lee, work on the document, I would like to see
Okay.
what's being worked on.
I passed out, this was behind your minutes that
Okay?
I passed out today, so it's an October 10th memo. Background on the development, history of development of the body worn camera policy. So if you look at July 27th, 2016, this is at the point at which we,
July 27th, what?
2016,
Right after the minutes. Oh, no.
Looks like this.
This is passed out.
it was passed out and it's right after your minutes. Do you want another copy?
Okay, here's the next one.
Thank you.
I wasn't here, Ms. Lee, so it was fine.
Oh, you.
I wasn't here.
Those are the 4 points of disagreement that still have yet to be resolved.
So,
Well, actually, some of them have been resolved. I could quickly go
And
through.
new ones have arisen.
But yes, true, that's
It's two
true.
plus one.
Because there's nowhere on here that mentions iPhones.
No, the iPhone
And-
Not addressed.
did not, was
And may I
not,
also
was
just
not a
say
thing.
that I also believe that the fact that recordings have been made for the last 2 years, or not, I'm sorry, not 2 years, in the last 2 meetings, we've been told that there's a whole, kind of undivulged culture of surveillance. That's what we've been told, that for decades has been going on. And I'm not clear that that is going to be resolved. Like I have this sort of concern that there's the body worn camera policies thing that will go on, but that since it's not illegal to make surreptitious recordings, that there's nothing really
that would keep them from doing that.
Well, I think you should take a look at the policy. There's an
I
area
have
in
taken a
here,
look at it.
there's an area in there that talks about recordings.
I understand.
And I think it has to, in your point, I think we have to look at, to see if that would apply to other than body worn camera recordings.
Right.
So that would be your point, to put it in that section and say, would
I'd like
this
some
apply,
strong, I'd
or
like
get some language for
some
it?
strong assertive language that says, no, you
Well,
don't
look
get
at
to
that
make.
section and see if you can figure
I
out
have
something
looked
that
at it.
works for you.
I
That would
have
be a
looked
good
at
place to do it. I mean, I think it's there. It's about preventing,
I don't feel
surreptitious.
confident that it will do that. I feel like it needs more.
well, you gotta get something in the policy, or it's not gonna happen. You just can't keep
Chair, there's
bringing
a
it up.
motion.
I mean, it's
No,
like
I
you gotta get some
understand.
wording and get it in the policy.
I understand.
There's a motion on the floor and the possibility of a different path to follow. I'd say we call the vote and see whether the subcommittee can be created or not created.
Look, can I clarify, is what Ms. Lee said, is that, I
That has not
don't,
been put into a motion.
I don't feel like that's a substitute motion. I
No,
feel like
I
that-
wasn't, first of all, I can't make a motion.
What, sorry?
I withdraw my motion.
So with Commissioner Ramsey withdrawing his motion, is there another motion that anyone would like to propose?
I would move, yes,
Yes.
I would move, that we, ask Ms. Lee to prepare the analysis that she suggested, comparing the policy that the PRC developed in the end, in 2016 with the currently proposed BPD Lexipol policy, calling out the main policy choices and areas of disagreement between those two policies, and presenting that to us and agendizing it at a full commission meeting at which we may decide to dedicate a considerable amount of time to considering.
Second that.
Is there any discussion on this motion? All right, if not, Ms. Lee, would you please call roll?
Okay, let me make sure I get.
They're all
Okay, Allaby,
Yay.
Matthews,
Yes.
Terrell,
Yes.
Prichett,
No.
Ramsey,
Yes.
Roberts,
Yeah.
Yampolsky.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Great, thank you. Okay, moving on to 9B, the Lexipol policies. So just as a reminder, we're only looking at number 1.
Can we go back to the reports?
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry.
Okay, reports,
Yes.
no problem. So, I'm just giving a report on the prioritizing safety for sex worker committee, and wanted to get members that participate. Contacted the commission on status of women. They have 2 individuals who would like to participate, one on an informal basis, and the other one would like to be appointed to the committee, and her name is Juliet Leftwich.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anyone else would like to serve on the committee, but I wanna get it moving so we can get something done, so I'm volunteering. Juliet Leftwich, Kitty Calendar had expressed potentially some interest, I don't know if she contacted anyone, but I didn't know if anyone else was interested or whether we should just keep going with the 2 of us.
When you have a public member, the majority of the subcommittee has to be, PRC members. So you need 1 more PRC member. And, Ms. Leftwich served as a public member of our surveillance subcommittee. I don't know if you know that.
Is there anyone who's interested in serving on the subcommittee? Okay, I'll serve on your subcommittee.
Okay, great.
I will appoint myself.
Okay, thank you.
It'll be quick.
Is that it for your report?
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Now moving on to 9B, does the Lexipol policy, Lexipol subcommittee want to, open up this discussion?
This Lexipol, yeah, sure. These Lexipol ones were from all business, so they were presented at the last commission meeting. So members of the commissions who have had plenty of time to look at the general orders in question. we're asking for review, concerns, of opinions, and for a motion to approve.
So just going down the list, is there anyone who had specific policies that they wanted to address?
This is number 3, right? Are we only
Number
talking about
one.
number, huh?
No, group one.
Group 1, the policies that are listed on the agenda.
Starting with 100.
No, but I mean, there were groups. So
Yes.
okay, give me, what number are we starting with in 100?
So we already
Yes.
passed
We already passed.
3 and 2,
Two
so we're
and
just
three.
doing group 1, 100 through 311.
Oh, okay, 1,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Yeah, Commissioner Prichett?
I would direct, commissioners to page 65, policy number 302, title handcuffing and restraints.
Excuse me, for the public, there's a binder here called
65,
Lexipol Policies.
66.
Okay.
Sorry? 302 is the name of the policy. It appears on page 65 of the packet from September 26th. Spit hoods. So I sent around some PowerPoint photos, pictures that we've been gathering around Berkeley of the use of spit hoods. Spit hoods, in our experience, are primarily used on people with mental health disabilities, 5150 calls. And I find it troubling. My understanding is that the primary justification for the use of these spit hoods is to prevent an individual from spitting or actually sharing bodily fluids, putting them on the police officers. However, as noted in policy, the RAP policy, if you go to page, when the discussion of the RAP policy, they say that it's, go to page 78. When they're explaining some of the signs that you should look for when the RAP device is being closed, it says if a restrained subject complains of or exhibits any of the following physiological conditions, immediate medical attention may be required. Respiratory distress, sudden quiet, etc. Change in facial color, elevated temperature, and vomiting. Now, if somebody has a hood on their head, it's not possible to monitor changes in facial color, changes in the color of the lips that would indicate respiration. Kayla Moore, when she encountered Berkeley police in her apartment, if you listen to the CAD recordings, a spit hood was called in that situation too, regardless of whether she was spitting. Sadly, she died before the spit hood was applied. So I don't understand why changing facial color matters during a RAP device, and yet it wouldn't matter when somebody is going through a mental health crisis of some kind. I'm against the spit hoods. I don't think we should allow them. I think they should be banned. I think it's inhuman and degrading and disorienting for the individual. And I think if officers are concerned about exposure to saliva, then they should mask up. And if officers want to be provided with surgical masks or hospital masks that they could carry with them, and maybe that would be a way to address their concerns while providing maximum safety for the individual being detained. That's a motion.
A motion to take that out of the.
To just prohibit the use of spit hoods.
Okay, so there is a motion. Is there a second to this motion? Okay, so if there's no second, is there any further discussion? Or I would also like to ask the department if you have any input on your use of spit hoods or experience.
The fact that we have them as a tool, it shows that we do support the use of spit hoods.
It's what?
We support the use of spit hoods
Oh,
under certain circumstances.
Commissioner Ramsey?
Because of their current policy related to spit hoods.
I don't know.
There's not. Chief Meehan said there was not, and Chief Freeman also said there was no policy. It's the first time it's been clarified.
So I have something to add about that. So you brought up the concern regarding the bodily fluid. So we're not only concerned about ourselves, we're also concerned about the public. A lot of the times when we have people detained in these situations, specifically dealing with people who may not, who may be altered in some way, and all of a sudden are spitting at people, we want to protect the public, not just ourselves. So it would be unrealistic for us to start passing out some sort of mask for the public to protect themselves. And so our concern is not just ours, but the public as well.
You let people get that close during that kind of an interaction where you're restraining someone?
Sometimes people get that close.
And that's worth risking somebody dying in your custody?
Can I ask a question to the police officers? So, talk to me about the mask itself. Can the person see through the mask?
Yes,
Can the person breathe through the mask?
they can.
Are there anything that constricts or tightens around the neck as the person makes movements or not? So it is not you move, it constricts.
No.
Is the person able to hear through the mask? Is the person able to talk through the mask?
do you use those, Bart?
I do not know. Look at that. And give me how an answer. Please leave, write that down. Write that down.
Something George Pete didn't know.
Or I don't know, Pete, about it.
Commissioner
Well,
Ramsey?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, I want the police to have things that are gonna make the situation safe. I don't really understand all the dynamics of without going into the pros and cons. So, we're kind of presuming that the committee, and got all the questions answered or something, and, so, I guess I would have one question, other than a couple of other comments about the draft here. How is it decided who's gonna have a mask, who's gonna get a mask and who isn't?
Typically, it would be a person who is actively spitting at people.
It's already spitting, it's not just like, well, I think they're gonna spit or something,
No, there's no, it
And
would
so-
be, someone who is actively either spitting or spit at someone, or that they are so, agitated that they're actually yelling, spitting is causing contaminants.
Is the department
It's
using them now?
purely a safety, piece of safety equipment.
Is the department using them now?
Yes,
How long have they been using them?
my entire career,
Really?
yes.
Okay.
Can I make one comment?
Commissioner Ramos was first, and then.
Go ahead.
Just as been on the committee, when I looked through these policies, I was trying to see whether there was something that was, we talked about burglarizing, that there wasn't something being added in by Lexipol that was inconsistent with Berkeley general orders, or that, there wasn't a justification by Lexipol that made sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Given that these things have been in use, it doesn't seem as though this policy expands in any way what the police is able to do. It actually, maybe for the first time, defines the circumstances in which they should. I think that if this is something that is problematic for people, that we should revisit it but we should visit it at a later time and look at the specific policy. For as far as the Lexipol review, they were converting from general orders to Lexipol. There were tons of policies to go through. And what we did was try to make sure that it was consistent with the current general orders and practice. So I have no concern if this is something that should be visited, but it seems like it should be separate from the Lexipol review policy. Because if we're stuck with reviewing the substance of every single policy, we're never gonna get through Lexipol. But if something's important enough, I'm not saying that this is not, that we need to visit, that this creates dangers to people in custody and so forth, we should do that, but we should do that as a separate agenda item, in my view.
Yeah, so, well, okay, I'm sorry.
Well, I agree with that as a sort of process. We did not in the subcommittee consider the kind of the substance of it. In 3.5 minutes of research while we've been talking about this, spit hoods are an issue for their use, their deployment, the circumstances in which they're used. For police departments around the world, the London Police Department recently banned their use in all settings except jails.
They banned these?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there are multiple examples, again, in 3.5 minutes of research, of people dying in custody where spit hoods were used. I'm not saying that they died because they asphyxiated because of the hood or otherwise, but the connection has been made. Cities have paid in settlements for those deaths and injuries. So it's not an irrelevant issue at all. So I would support considering it and developing a view on it, but outside of the kind of the Lexipol policy process that we're undertaking.
If I agree and disagree, and I'm gonna be a contrary here, because there was a general order that specifically addressed it should not to minimize Commissioner Prichett's concerns, even though I disagree. I think it might be valid for us to take this one out of the equation for now, and ask the police department to do a presentation to us and speak to the use and when. And maybe then we can make a decision on this one as it relates to incorporated into a handcuffing, restraining general order, something that was not included in there before. I think this one we can make an exception and then have a presentation and then probably move forward whether on the vote with research of whether it's something we should follow or not.
Commissioner Prichett?
So I have to say, I increasingly feel like we really are just sort of rubber stamp at this point. Because we have a police department that is responding to quite a number of mental health calls. Quite a number. By their own estimates, about a third of what they do is response to mental health calls. And I'm just shocked that it doesn't even occur to us to ask a mental health provider to come in and talk about what is best for the person. Yeah, officers are worried that a passerby might get some saliva from somebody yelling, but that when you cannot, and the contradiction in their own policies, that, when you're using a wrap, you want to be able to see whether or not they have oxygen, whether or not they are breathing, whether or not they vomited in their own throat. You can't, from any of the pictures I showed you, can you logically say that you could actually discern either of the things? But that we don't bother with, this process, Lexipol says march, so we march. It's disheartening, commissioners, I have to say.
So I do agree that this is an issue, but I also agree that we don't have enough information to fully discuss what we want to take action on this right now. So I would say there are two proposals here. One, to pass this Lexipol policy and then take spit hoods up as a separate issue, or to, if I am understanding you correctly, take this policy, not vote on this specific Lexipol policy. Yeah, so is there a motion?
And have a
in
presentation
support
with
of
the police
either of those?
department, and maybe somebody from mental health, to why, I mean, let's look at one, let's have one in front of us, and we make a discussion. Let's have the presentation with the police department to say this is what we use and we don't use it. But I think that right now, one way or the other, whether it's visceral, not visceral, whether it's true or not, we're making an informed decision. If it's just the right process to say no, then let's just have the information. And I think we have a way out here because it wasn't in the general order before. So that particularly makes it a distinctive thing we can take out.
Okay. So,
I have a question on the policy then. So I'm looking at 302 here, and the red, like on the first page there, it's like, it says 302.3, alternative means of restraints include but not limited to. Do you guys see that?
What page number is this?
Is that already in the policy? Or are these things that were added? The red.
I'm sorry, I'm just pulling up.
I mean, most of this thing is red.
yeah, who added the red into the policy?
The what?
I'm asking the same question, who added the red?
So there was a separate policy that literally just dealt with wrap system and wrap ankle strap. There was a separate general order. So they have taken that general order because it's just on its own and brought it into the system here. So that's
But
why.
that's the red part?
That's the red part.
I
It's
see the
also-
policies attached here, it's their other policy dated 2010.
Okay, so the red, so,
The red is
to
what?
answer your question, you start with the Lexipol policy.
Yeah,
The red is a change to this form Lexipol policy. Sometimes there is an addition because in Berkeley's general orders, there's something that did not appear in the Lexipol.
right.
And sometimes it's not because of general orders. There have been a few times where the Berkeley Police Department command staff, in reviewing the Lexipol policies, thought there was a better practice.
A perfect example of that.
So this red would have, these 5 things here would have been in the old policy?
That is an example.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
going just off memory, I believe, we're from the old policy, the old general order. You have to look at the general order and there's
Yeah.
a chart.
Are you saying that
Okay.
BPD had this different policy?
No, we're talking about
You're talking
302.3. 302.3.
302.3, he's talking about the alternative means of restraint.
He moved from one discussion to this question. But a perfect example of that is whether the person who may be is known to be pregnant. Lexipol is known to be pregnant.
Right.
Berkeley policies may be pregnant.
Okay.
The police doesn't need to know that the person is pregnant or not in order to affect a different kind of circumstance. If there is even the inkling that the person may be pregnant. So
Right.
that's a change, but it's in red because it's a change from what the policy Lexipol is, or it's an addition from a standing policy of Berkeley that was not in the Lexipol formatting. So when you're doing the Lexipol changes, it's not only a review of whether the language is the same, but the language is different, but also how it is formatted. If the
Yeah, I
general order that
understand.
we had a formatting that was much different, and
I understand.
Lexipol had a much different formatting, but it's still in line with the Berkeley general order, that things were added and they were always in red, so we know that that's where it came in.
Right. Okay, so that helps clarify.
But we-
The other
Yes, sir.
the other question I had, or statement I have, I guess, is I finally caught up on my reading on these, and this is an example, there are other better examples in there that I'll point to, but the old policies tend to use the word shall all the time. These policies use the word should. And I really don't like that myself. As I say, it came up in the body language issue because all the lexical language was should, and there were certain things, we changed the shoulds to shall, as I remember, in our recommendation. And I understand that there could be uses of both, but if you look at this policy,
302.
there are no shalls and they're all shoulds. And I'm just looking, I see maybe one shall. I just kind of went through here, maybe there's two, but there's about 15 shoulds. And I noticed that in the other policies too, when you look back at the original policy, it's mostly shall in many of the language, and in the new ones, it's mostly should. And so I'm wondering if you looked at that, or I can point out some other policies on this list that it's the same thing, but to me, should is permissive and shall is required.
But that's
It
a
seems like
legal
that
discussion.
if you're making a wholesale shift to shoulds, it's more permissive and less required.
In general orders right now, there's a broader discussion in the United States on whether should and shall mean the same thing or not. Whether shall should be something which is a reporting issue or an accountability issue, and should be used in terms of processes and steps that police officers take. So your query is correct. I mean, as it relates to the spit hood, for example, there's a lot of shoulds instead of shall. A spit hood should not be used when somebody obviously is bleeding. Should that be a shall? I mean, so that's a really good question to present. The question is whether a police officer infers that a shall or a should. There's a difference between saying you should do that or you shall do that. I mean, what is the balance legally?
Yeah,
I mean,
understand.
as it relates to the meaning.
Well, for example, I'm just looking at this page 67. Page 67, I guess. On the masks.
There's no BPD.
302.6. And it says, like the third paragraph, says officers utilizing spit masks should ensure that the spit mask is fastened properly to allow for adequate ventilation, blah, 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 blah. That's a pretty important issue. But actually, the two words there together, should ensure, are opposite. It's like, well, you should, but that's kind of permissive in a way. But ensure means you're supposed to do it, right? And so to me, sort of saying to an officer, well, you should make sure it's fastened properly, you should make sure there's ventilation, and that the person restrained can breathe normally. I mean, to me, that's like a shall. Like, well, you're required to do that. So anyway, I raised that. I'm not sure where to go with it, but I noticed it on several of the other ordinances. And on this particular one, I think it should be held back for more input. I would support that motion.
Okay, do we wanna take action on this specific one now, or continue on with the Lexipol policies and vote on them as a whole? Does anyone have any preferences? Okay, if
Does
not,
anybody have any other issues they want to raise?
yeah, are there any other issues with the Lexipol policies?
You mean with any of the policies, is that what you're?
Yes.
So, I'm sorry, I don't, what is gonna happen with this policy? Are you saying they're just gonna be plucked out of that little crop?
There's no pending motion.
There is no pending motion, but I think that's what a few people have suggested is to pick it out for this.
I'm saying, what is happening? I would make a motion. Is there a motion?
No.
Okay.
Please
Well,
make one.
on 302, I would make a motion that we hold our approval or recommendations on this policy until we have the department make a presentation about the issues related to the mask and hoods and all that. And that be scheduled in the next meeting or the next couple of meetings. That would be my motion.
Would you be willing to add to that motion that we accept the rest of the Lexipol policies in group one?
Please don't.
The rest of what?
The Lexipol policies in group
All
one.
of them?
Don't do like that, please.
The ones
No.
that-
that are
Yeah.
the group of 8 or 10.
He said no.
No, we don't have to.
No, you mean number one, the whole group of number one? No, that's not part of my motion.
Okay, so there is a motion, is there a second on the motion?
No, it's not part of my motion. I have questions on the other ones.
Yes.
I'm wondering if the maker of the motion would be willing to consider that the approval of the spit hoods is contingent upon having somebody in the medical field talk to us about the implications of, why don't doctors use spit hoods on patients?
I'm not really objecting to that.
So I'm saying that our approval of this item, if you want a presentation by the police department, but I would also like to recommend that if in your motion you include some informed, presentation by a healthcare provider, a mental health care provider or a medical care provider. But somebody, those people don't use spit hoods. I wonder why. They care for the public.
That would be fine with me. I would accept that.
So there is a motion, is there a second?
And I'll second this motion.
Is there any further
And,
discussion?
you know, on the general notion of what we're doing, I mean, it's relative to this too. But I don't see a problem with taking a few of these if we have issues with them and debating them a little more. We don't have to wholesale everything. I mean, they're already running on certain policies. So, if we approve 100 and hold 5 of them or something, it can't be the end of the world.
Is that part of the motion, or just,
No, that was a general
that's just a
statement,
rant?
yeah.
Is
But it
there-
has to do with this, because I was
Well, it sounds like
recommending we
to
hold,
quote it.
I was recommending we hold one of these,
Yeah.
that's.
To
that's
quote
what I
him, it
said.
sounds like a rant, it's not part of the motion,
Yeah.
it's a rant.
Is there any more discussion on the motion? Okay, if not, all in favor of the motion,
Aye.
raise your hand. All opposed? Abstentions? Alright, so the motion has passed. Moving on to the other Lexipol policies in this group, are there any policies that commissioners want to look at specifically?
Okay, I do have a couple more. Let's see, we're on this, the group starting with 100, right? Yeah, okay. And somewhere there's a recommendation from your subcommittee on this one. 100. Hold on. No, okay. All right.
I have, I'm sorry, is there a floor?
Yeah.
Okay. I have to look through my notes on each one of these, hold on.
Mr. Roberts, Terry, your concern on 100 was the one about discretion, the question about, are you pinpointing the question on what we sent to the chief for questions as well?
I just had some notes on each one of these, and I was just gonna raise my questions right here, otherwise I'm okay with them.
No, please do.
On the training, 203,
2 or 3.
What page is that on?
Hmm?
What page?
47, it's like. is there, where would the training program for the year be outlined? I mean, this kind of gives a general policy, but from a department standpoint, when does the training program come up for the year? And is that referenced in here somewhere that says procedures, and it says, the officers, the training officers managing, the programs, and the training sergeant is supervising the training officer, and, does all these things on page 48 to, make sure that, that's the checklist for the program. But where does the actual program, the training curriculum show up, or the training pieces for that year?
Not in a general order. That wouldn't be part of a general order.
But
that would be part of
doesn't-
an internal training program that will be created by the police department and implemented by the chief on a yearly basis, which will probably have to do which officers are doing post 1 year, which officers are going for the advanced CIT training. So everything has to be modulated in accordance to where each individual police officer is in their training. In addition to that, where is the 6-month, 9-month period in which all police officers need to be retrained on something? But that would not be part of a general order. This general order specifically talks about supervisory steps, what are the steps to be taken in terms of having the authorization to do the training, who evaluates the training, and how do police officers individually get credit for the training. The
Okay.
general order would not have what the training syllabus is
Yeah.
for a specific year, because it could change.
I see that. And I'm just looking back at 203.4, it's 47, says, 203.4, training plan will be
So what
developed.
page are you on?
203.4,
47.
page 47. It says a training plan will be developed and maintained by the Personnel and Training Bureau officer, blah, blah, blah. So I'm presuming this is transferred over from the old policy. Is there a training plan that you could go say, well, there's the training plan, and it's been, developed and maintained by the Bureau officer?
We have a training coordinator, and it's very similar to what?
Training what?
Coordinator. It's a position within our personnel and training division, and it does change. We have a calendar, throughout the year that things come up, such as body worn cameras.
Yeah,
So there are specific post standards, which we have, are directed by post to maintain. And
okay,
that person is responsible for making sure we're post compliant.
okay. 308, page 81.
Canines?
Hmm?
Canines.
Okay. So basically here, then, this would be another one where, it's interesting because this covers dogs and helicopters. At least the memo did there.
No, the council policy.
Council policy, yeah, okay.
This
The
doesn't.
council policy that's attached covers dogs and helicopters, right? And I'm wondering how that relates here.
But not dogs in helicopters.
It was,
Huh?
Not dogs in helicopters.
I think as.
This is canines, so
Yes, sir.
308, canine.
I think the resolution, that discussion by council was in the context of crowd control.
So the two don't conflict or relate or anything?
Which two?
Yeah.
Well, here's the council policy, right, talks about the use of dogs from other law enforcement agencies, blah, blah, blah. And, I mean, basically this just transferred over from what the policy is now, right? I mean, that's.
I disagree.
Huh?
I disagree.
Oh, there was.
With what?
I
What
think
you
I
just
know
said.
what you're gonna say.
It doesn't
which is-
transfer over?
Which is.
I perceive a very significant difference in the policy.
Yeah, and that's who's authorizing it.
I also, I mean, are you talking about
I'm
helicopters
trying
or
to
dogs?
find that out.
No, we're
huh?
talking about dogs.
I'm talking about dogs.
Okay,
And when I read the previous policy, it says, police use of dogs in the is not in the following circumstances. To apprehend suspects where, 1, there is a threat to human life, and 2, the suspect is reasonably believed to be armed with a deadly weapon, and the suspect is in a controlled, contained area, and there are no known occupants. All 3 of those must be present in order to allow a dog to be brought in. When I look on page 82, 308.4, apprehension guidelines, a canine may be used to locate and apprehend a suspect if the on-scene supervisor or watch commander reasonably believes the individual has either committed or is committing or threatening to commit any serious offense, and if the suspect is believed to be concealed in an area where entry. So this person does not have to be armed. And I'd like to hear more about what is a serious offense. Is theft a serious offense? And if that is so, this is a major policy shift in Berkeley. The public, there was huge public outcry probably 10, 15 years ago when a similar policy, when the possibility of dogs, not dogs that locate missing persons, not dogs that sniff for drugs, not dogs that sniff for bombs, but dogs that bite. And we were able to bring people out from jurisdictions that do use dogs, people who have been mauled by dogs. And the
Okay.
damage is very significant.
Yeah, I understand. I wasn't making a statement that it was.
I hear you. I'm
switched
just-
over.
it's another-
I was trying to understand if it was the same.
I
And
get
you're
you.
saying
Some of
it's
these
not.
policies represent a huge cultural shift.
Short circuit this real quick. We missed this one. I mean, we tried to make sure that the policies conformed with the city resolution, so this is one we missed. There is another indication, there are other examples where we did catch it, but this is one where we missed it. So we'll make the correction.
So this is one we should hold for a little more input or something?
I don't think there's any more input. We need to recommend to follow the city council resolution.
Mhm.
So I'm sure we're all gonna agree on that.
Yeah, well,
It's required
let
by
me be
law.
clear though. Do we have a canine court?
No.
Oh.
No. So this is basically when dogs are called in from
From
another
outside.
agency, right? And so everything you're talking about, Andrea, would be dogs called in from another agency than not from our own agency, right? So it's not something you use every day, it would be something more, in crowd control situation or something.
Well,
maybe.
it's, crowd control, crowd management is
Right.
prohibited on the general order. And if a canine dog is brought in, for use by, I think the one that we missed the most here was the fact that, and you know, we did it on the helicopters and this one just went by us. The canine team may request a trusted department with the approval of the chief of police from his or her designee or the city manager. That should be around.
Right.
Should be a city department with the approval of the city manager, absent city manager with the approval of the chief of police. So it's not the chief of police and the city manager, and then the chief of police, and the
Right.
city manager is not available. That's city council. But take in consideration that if a dog comes in from the outside as a requested aid, not in court control or crime management, because it's prohibited by the general order. I mean, we run into the mutual aid's concerns. No general order that is written by the Berkeley Police Department to affect the behavior of Berkeley Police Department shall affect another police department.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. Are you saying that if we call mutual aid and they bring a dog, that we don't
Well,
control
if you're
that?
calling for a dog for a different agency, that's mutual aid. Mutual aid is not only restricted to crowd control and crowd management. That's a misnomer. Anytime that you request outside agency help by another agency, regardless of what it is, it doesn't have to be First Amendment demonstration. It is mutual aid. So if you're requesting the use of a police dog to come in because you're looking whether it is for someone for dogs, for bombs, and whatever it is, the use of that dog by that police officer is ruled by the general order by which that police officer works under, not by the Berkeley Police Department. That's a reality. That's California law, that is
There's a lot of
FEMA,
disagreement
that's
about
FEMA.
that.
Well, it is disagreement, it's not the law. The disagreement is not based on law.
No, it's
We had this
Berkeley law.
conversation over and over again.
Ask George
FEMA says that any police officer that comes in here is subject to the general orders by which a department is ruled. They cannot be held accountable on an allegation of misconduct by a general order that is ruled by Berkeley. It can only be held accountable on an allegation of misconduct or improper behavior by the general order by which they operate. So you can have the disagreement, but it's not an accurate disagreement because it's not the law. So we need to understand that if a dog comes in and is used, it might necessarily be under the jurisdiction of Berkeley general order. It has to be under the jurisdiction of whatever department it is, whether it's FBI or DEA, whatever it is. But having said that, the police department in Berkeley can choose not to use the dog as a restriction on whether allowed to use within the perimeters of the city. But I think we need to but that's a much broader discussion. We can pull this one out if that's what we want until we can correct the language as presented, particularly as it relates to who makes that call.
So is there a motion?
But you disagree, you don't want to pull it back.
No, I'm happy to pull it out and send it back to the subcommittee and we can correct the language.
Does someone want to make a motion to pull this out?
I'll make that motion.
A motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Abstentions? Alright, so moved.
Doggy hello.
Okay, I have one on 310, page 93.
Yes, sir.
You know, and this comes kind of back to taking the old and putting it in the new. But if I just look at the volume of this, there's like 7 pages of new policy and 30 pages of old policy.
Yeah.
And it's like, other than the font size, which is a little different, but it's like, well, seems like something must have dropped out. And it seemed like a lot might have dropped out actually. But,
We actually paid a lot of attention to this one, so really, this one was, we actually paid a lot of attention to this one.
so you guys went through this
Yeah,
pretty
there was a lot of
carefully
things that
and-
were repetitive. There were things that were repetitive that if you look at the old general order, there is some definitions that are not necessary. There's repetition of the same thing over and over again in different places.
Mhm.
And I think that, Ari, were you here for this discussion or were just, both of us on it?
I don't think it
Yeah.
So you're pretty confident that it represents the old, and not just, it just, you know, because Lexipol is famous for, like, keep it short and sweet, right?
And for the record, is 4
And
pages against 7 pages,
because-
not 4 pages against 30 pages. 4 pages Lexipol, 7 pages original order.
For which one, this one?
Yes, I'm counting as we go.
Well, I'm just counting right here.
But, oh, you're counting double pages? The other one has double pages too, so it's 8 versus 14.
You what?
4 pages double-sided, 14 pages, 4 pages double-sided is 8 pages, 7 pages double-sided is 14 pages.
Yeah.
There's not 30 pages, Terry. 1, 2, 3,
You
4.
counted the pages,
Yes, sir.
the pieces of paper, then you have to multiply that
4
by
times
2.
2 plus 1 is
You have to
9.
multiply it by 2.
9 pages. 1, 2, 3,
Okay.
4,
Do you
Anyway, okay.
5, 6,
Okay, this is another, this is,
7, 8.
okay, one last thing. This is another classic on shoulds and shalls. Because if you look through the new one, 90%, or I don't know, maybe 80% are shoulds. And if you look at the old one, most are shalls. So, again, I'm not quite sure what to do with that. It's kind of, I know, I guess it's more of a systematic thing. We have to, maybe we don't have to, but I'd like to see us have to discuss at some point, because, I mean, all the ordinances are that way.
The should and shall are both actually auxiliary verbs, right? We know that. Shall means something that's going to happen in the future, that might happen in the future. Should is something that's going to happen in the moment or in the past. It's just a verbiage. So if we have a concern about whether something is going to happen in the future, which is a shall, by the definition of the verb, or in the past and present, which is a should, that's what the conversation should be. But if it's linguistics, we can address it based on the linguistics, how the verb is used according to the law. If it's not the discussion, then it's just a perception. Whether we think that shall is an immediate and should is not an immediate. That's not what the verb means. They're both auxiliary. Future, past, present, or moment. That's what they are. So we can certainly have that discussion, but it cannot be based on perception. It has to be based on what the verb is and how it's interpreted by the law. Whether a court of law would interpret a shall different than a should on the future action or a present past action. That's what it is. I mean, but I agree, shall sounds more stronger.
What you're telling me is should is a requirement?
But they're both requirements. They're auxiliary verbs. One, shall means something that's going to happen in the future, and should something happens in the present or in the past. Should ensure, shall ensure.
Can I make a proposal for this?
Sure. Doesn't make any sense to me.
So if
You
this is
should.
something. Yeah, if this is something that is a concern, I think there's too many in here to deal with it, but we can possibly, when passing these, make a recommendation to the department that they keep that in consideration, and maybe, because I think the biggest issue is not how we interpret it, but how the department interprets it and how they
Well,
their
it's
policy.
how the law interprets it. It's about the law, right? Because somebody gets a complaint filed against them, an officer, and they're gonna say, well, I wasn't required to do that. It was only like, in my judgment, I could either do it or not do it. I was supposed to should, but you know, this thing happened over here and I was distracted and blah, blah, blah. But
Just open the door. Should, shall, or may. We're not saying may within should or shall. Past,
Yeah,
future,
yeah.
present, may is discretionary. There's no may here. It's a should or
Okay,
a shall.
I'm gonna leave it alone for now. That's all
No,
the questions I have.
but I want you to be comfortable because I'm
I'm
uncomfortable
gonna
about
do a
it
little
too.
bit more research on it.
Of course.
Commissioner Prichett, you have, that was all your questions?
That was it.
Okay, Commissioner Prichett, I believe you had some policies that you wanted to address?
I would like to revisit, this one of restraints, handcuffing and restraints, it's kind of unfortunate because it conflates three very different, situations, the situation of the general handcuffing procedure with the use of the wrap device, the use of the spit hood, it's all kind of mixed up together. In the old part, what I'm looking for is, I'm looking for guidelines for handcuffing. There have been issues with allegations of disparate treatment that young people of color, when they are detained, are more likely to be handcuffed. And what I'm looking for in the new policy is some guidance about when people during detention would or would not be handcuffed. So maybe I'm not saying it, but on page 71 in the old policy, I see that it should be the policy of this department to handcuff or otherwise effectively restrain all arrested persons or detainees as reasonably necessary to protect the lives and safety of officers, the public, and the persons arrested. I presume that in that situation, an officer might be called upon to justify their use of handcuffs on a detainee. So I wouldn't expect somebody who, is being stopped and questioned and related to a petty theft to be handcuffed if that person was potentially a suspect in a violent crime. I might expect that. So maybe somebody can guide me to where I might find some guidance in the new policy that could allay my concern.
Is this part of the policy that we chose to take out of the sponge. This is the same one with the spit heights.
That's true, that's true.
Does
So
anybody
maybe I
have
can
any
just flag that as a
comments to
concern
that?
for the
Yeah.
subcommittee.
If
Well-
not, I would say we should address it when it comes up again.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure, because all the recommend, on 302.5, application of
Yeah.
handcuffs or plastic cuffs. All the recommended for most arrest situations, handcuffing is not an absolute requirement of the department. Officers should consider handcuffing any person they reasonably believe warrants a degree of restraint. However, officers do not conclude that regardless of the circumstances, every person should be handcuffed. That's one. Situations on 302, 304, 302.4.1. Situations may arise where it might be reasonable to restrain an individual who may.
I'm sorry, where are you reading from?
Investigation. I'm reading for the new general order that addresses your concerns about.
Paragraph, please.
So,
Okay,
so 302.4.1, restraint of detainees, addresses your concern. And 302.5, application of handcuffs or plastic cuffs, I think addresses your concerns as well.
yeah, maybe so.
And then I would ask maybe any future questions about this to be taken up when we do discuss this again, because it has been agendized, if that's all right with you, Commissioner Prichett.
Yeah, no, I was wondering if there was an issue to flag for the committee, but, I mean, I guess that,
It's a little different wording, but it's,
yeah.
you know what it is, it's in two different places. When we looked at it, we said it was all in one paragraph, but they moved it into different places, and that's what we found it.
I think the other one is written,
Wordier. It's
oh, this one's.
it's 30 pages long, Mr. Roberts.
Are there any other specific policies that commissioners want to flag or discuss? If not, is there a motion to pass this group?
With the exception of
With the
302
exception
and
of the two
308.
taken out?
302,
Yes.
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
How does that get?
What's the motion?
To pass this group with the exception of 302 and 308. Just to use the count. Is there any discussion on the motion?
I'm sorry, who was the seconder?
Allaby. All right, if there's no more discussion, I'll call a vote. All in favor, please raise your
Aye.
hand.
Okay.
All right, so unanimous. Thank you.
Was Commissioner Prichett raising her hand?
Yeah.
Okay, I couldn't tell if you were for papers.
This,
Time to go. All right, so it is, I keep forgetting this clock is slow. I'm sorry.
No, I'm talking to myself.
Oh, okay.
I'm not answering them, I'm just talking to myself.
All right, so with that, we can move on to closing public comment. Is there any public comment at this time?
There is.
Yes.
I'd like to thank the commission for inviting Mr. Chanin. I found his presentation helpful and informative. I'd like to just remark, he made allusion to Penal Code 632, that is the statutory guarantee of a reasonable expectation of privacy in California. What he neglected was Penal Code 633, which says in a relevant part, nothing in 632 prohibits any police officer of a city from recording any communication that they could record prior to the effective date of this chapter. So we're not talking about something airy and ephemeral. We're talking about the next section of the actual law that explicitly carves out the freedom of the police to do what they have been doing for apparently the past 50 years when this law was passed. The subject of body-worn cameras has come up here, and I took it upon myself actually to look at what San Francisco did. And their rule about notification and consent says, when feasible, members should inform individuals that they are being recorded. And given all the discussion that we've had about should, I actually point out that that's usually interpreted as a discretionary verb, not as a mandatory verb. So this is something that, in light of the last comment, the last discussion, you really should be paying very close attention to. In a completely different setting, not the legal system, but rather in standard settings governing the rules for Wi-Fi and other communications protocols, shall is mandatory and should is nice to have.
1 minute.
I also have the rules that Los Angeles uses for the so-called secret or clandestine or hidden or surreptitious recordings. And apparently these are so old that they actually talk about tape recording. The word cassette may actually be here in the actual rule. So they've been doing it for a long time. They've had a rule for it a long time. The one thing I'd like to point out for the good of the order is that San Francisco has a department 13 times that of Berkeley, and Los Angeles is 57 times the size. They have a lot more people to put on this kind of rules making. I'd just like you to consider that as you proceed in your work, which frankly I appreciate your doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any more public comment at this time? All right, seeing as there's no public comment, meeting adjourned.